Hey everyone! So there's been a slight change of plans. See, there is this vehicle that we have to go and pick up, and it's located quite a few hours drive away from here, and I really would have liked to go and get that in the old McGear's Deutz. That's why I've been sort of rushing to get this done and ready and get it out on the road. But because we ended up with a few unforeseen, time-consuming extra jobs on this thing, I'm simply running out of time to go and get this thing because the winter is hitting us now. And this vehicle that we're picking up, it's already disassembled and partially restored, so I really don't want to be dragging that around on our winter roads on an open trailer, because we use an absurd amount of road salt here, and it would just be a crying shame to get that thing completely covered in salt before it's even put back together. So once again, we're gonna have to resort to the good old trusty Humvee. Now, I'm not upset about it, I really do like driving my Humvee, but the problem here is that this vehicle that we're picking up, it's fairly heavy, and I can actually not put that on my trailer and tow it around legally. That would be overload. But because this vehicle is already disassembled, my hope is that we can spread out the load a bit by putting some of the components onto the Humvee itself. Because somehow that makes the exact same amount of weight perfectly safe and legal, but that's just Europe for you. So, we're going to be heading over to the place where we dropped off the old Unimog 404. Now, if you don't know what that's all about, there is a couple of videos explaining all that stuff. I'll leave a link to that down in the description if you want to check it out. But back when we dropped that off, some people seemingly got the wrong idea, or maybe I just didn't explain it very well, but we didn't just give it away. We ended up making a trade, and I essentially just traded one project for another, and that's the thing that we're going over to get now. And it is located in that exact same bunker where I assume the Unimog still is. And that really brings us to another, or really two other reasons why we have to get this done now. First of all, the guys over there, they are getting some of all their other vehicles in for winter storage, and they are simply running out of room in that bunker. But also, tomorrow seems to be the only day when we can get everyone together and get this taken care of. Otherwise, it's going to be several weeks before we can do this, and that's just simply not going to work because we're coming into the holidays and all that, and we have to get this done before Christmas. But even then, the guys over there, they have to attend a Christmas parade later in the day tomorrow, so we're going to have to be there a bit early, and it might be a bit rushed. I'm not sure exactly how much we get to film over there, but I'm going to film what I can and explain what I can. Otherwise, we'll talk more about this when we get back. But let's just get the trailer hooked up and get ready. Alright, so everything is looking good, or at least good enough, and I think we are just about ready to head out. Now, as mentioned, we do have a few hours of driving and also have to get all of this done before the guys leave for that Christmas parade, so we're going to be leaving pretty early in the morning. And yeah, by the way, we are bringing an old boat trailer with us. This is a completely separate story, but thing is that the guys over there have been getting this old airboat, and they just don't really have any way to move that thing around. So they were asking around if anyone had an old boat trailer they could use, and we just happened to know someone who had this, so we're going to be bringing this with us to give it to them. Alright, so much as I expected, we ended up being a bit busy over there. Mainly because this vehicle and all of its components were located at the very back of the bunker, so we had to move a lot of stuff to get all of this outside. And pretty soon we found ourselves a little bit pressed for time, so we got right into loading. And we detached our trailer and started putting some of all the bigger components up onto the back of the Humvee. But right here in the background, you can just get a quick glimpse of that old airboat. That's the one that we brought that old boat trailer for. Or actually, they call this thing a hydrocopter. They never had many of these, and the reason they got them was for one specific airbase where the end of the runway was going over some shallow water. And the thinking was, if they ever had to recover anyone from those waters, they didn't have any vehicles that could go out there, so they bought a couple of these Swedish airboats. And from what I've been told, this is the only one remaining. And we also didn't film that, we just had to quickly install that engine into the chassis. The engine was separate from the vehicle, it was sitting on a pallet by itself, but we just didn't have anywhere left to load that pallet, so we ended up picking the engine up with that forklift and just quickly dropping it into place in the chassis. That way we could just go ahead and load up the whole thing as one unit. And yeah, I really should get an electric winch for my trailer. Because even though this truck is partially disassembled, that box on the back is still full of stuff. So this whole thing was pretty heavy and way over the capacity of that little winch. So we also had to put a snatch block in the line just to make sure we didn't break the whole thing. And that really does make the process quite a bit slower. But taking it nice and easy, we did get the whole thing up there with no issues. And luckily we suddenly found ourselves with an extra vehicle, so we were able to take a lot of those small and heavy components and load those into the back of that. And as for the old Unimog, that is sitting safely inside the bunker. Now they have slowly started this project, but of course a restoration like this is going to need some funding, so they're in the process of acquiring that. And the project itself is not really going to start until sometime next year. You know, I was just so pleased that we were able to do this whole trip without a single drop of rain. Not even wet roads or anything like that. It was actually perfect weather for this trip. But then of course it's been raining all night and all morning while this stuff was parked out here. It just had to get wet. But with where this thing has been parked for many years, this little bit of rain is not going to make a difference. So, where do we even start? I guess we start with the main haul here. What we have here, or rather what we have all over the place right now, is a 1950 something Dodge Power Wagon W300M. This is a former Danish military vehicle. This particular one was for a mechanics unit, so kind of fitting, I guess. And I suppose we could just briefly talk about this thing. This is a 1999 Nissan Primera, and we just got this, well, I want to say for free, but we got this because we've been helping out the guys over there, and really, they just had to get rid of it anyway. This was a former fire department vehicle, and it was the one that the fire chief would have been driving around in, so it did have blue lights and sirens and all that stuff. Do have a panel down there for controlling all that. It had radios and all that stuff in here, but they did take that out before we got it. But there is a reason that we were just given this thing, because even though it looks nice and it does drive all right and it steers and stops and all that stuff, it is fully functional, but I have been told that it is extremely rusty underneath. So the guys over there, they were planning on using this just as a regular little runabout vehicle, but when they saw how rusty it was, they just didn't really have the manpower to fix this up, or really the will to fix this up, because there's not a whole lot of value in this vehicle. And when you are dealing with museum stuff, typically it's all based on volunteer work, and you're just not going to get anyone to freely volunteer to fix up this regular car for just having it as a little runabout. So eventually they figured it was not worth the effort, and they just asked us, you know, if we wanted this, because they were pretty much just going to scrap it. So I figured, hey, you know what? Free car, why not? And also it ended up working in our favor, because we needed room for all the stuff we were carrying from over there. So we've been loading this up with a lot of boxes of all kinds of miscellaneous items and parts for the Dodge and whatnot. So this was a little bit of an extra transport vehicle, which was pretty handy for this. But to be honest, I don't really know what we're gonna do with this. You know, let me know if you have some idea as to what we can do with this thing. But back to the main vehicle. This old Dodge, this is the trade that I made for the old Unimog 404. So yeah, I traded one old rusty truck for another, but I think this is really cool. I've always liked these old Dodges, but I've just never been able to get my hands on them. They are pretty rare over here, and when they do show up, they're typically pretty expensive. But there's also a lot of firsts in this for me, because, well, first of all, I've never had a Dodge. And also, I've never had anything this old, and I've never had anything with a flathead engine. Reason they call these flatheads is because this here is the cylinder head. It's just this one flat piece. Actually, we call them side valves here because the valves are out by the side of the piston. But yeah, I've never actually tinkered with one of these. I don't think we got to film it, but the engine was actually sitting on a separate pallet, but we just simply didn't have any more room to load that pallet up anywhere, so we ended up picking up the engine and just dropping it into the chassis. So it is in the right place, but it's not bolted down or anything. That's why I have straps running over that as well. But I have been told that this engine will run, but I guess we're gonna see about that. I think I already mentioned, but this vehicle is partially restored. They've actually already done a lot of work to this thing. You can see they've done a lot up here on the front part of the frame. They've done a lot to the cab. They've fixed up the whole firewall and such, but there is still a bunch of rust work left to do in this cab. It does have some holes in it, but a lot of the other loose components, they have all been cleaned up and powder coated. It's all that red stuff. Now, there's a reason it's red, but we can talk more about that later. Because right now I am, as usual this time of year, running out of daylight. So let's go ahead and see if we can get all this stuff unloaded and get it inside. Well boys, it looks like we have a problem here. My otherwise trusty old Ford is letting me down. I parked this here only yesterday, or maybe the day before that. It hasn't been here for long, and it was starting up just fine a couple of days ago. But now it was cranking really slowly. It sounded like it was running out of battery, so I just quickly went and got another battery. I know that is fully charged, but now it's not even trying. Now, it was slowly cranking just a moment ago, and also it is still trying. You can see on the alternator there, it is trying to turn the engine little by little. So I don't think it's locked up or anything like that. I think the starter has simply just burned out just now. That's a bit unfortunate. I actually really needed this. But before I completely give up on this, I just want to try something, because the big positive for the starter here is really easy to get to. So I'm just going to short out the relay up here just to make sure it's pushing that drive in to engage with the flywheel. And then I'm going to hook my positive clamp or a jumper cable clamp onto this terminal right here, just in case it is simply a bad connection somewhere and the starter itself may still be all right. We'll see. Okay, let's give this a try. Nothing. It's pulling some amps. Wow. Is this just shorting directly to ground? Kind of feels like that. What about the terminal up here? Well, pretty much the same thing. Less sparks, but still shorting out. Let's just see what's going on here. Oh yeah. That is shorted out directly to ground somehow. What about this? Yep, same up here on the terminal on the relay. They are just shorted out directly to ground. Wow, okay. Well, this was not really supposed to be the will it start part of the video. But it looks like we're gonna have to unload all that stuff by hand, because I can't really do anything about this right now. But it does seem we have another project on our hands. And here I thought I was running out of projects. But hey, at least it's not parked out in a muddy field in the middle of the winter. I'm making a bit of a mess of my yard here. I think this is as close as we're gonna get. I am just spinning all 4 tires trying to move this. Man, it's slippery out here. But hey, this should do just fine. Let's just see if we can roll this down from here. I think we have plenty of room. Besides, I don't think it rolls so well that it's just gonna carry on through the wall. Let's just see if there's a reason this is flat, or if we can actually get some air in it. Well, looks like it's filling up. Nice. It's gonna roll a lot better if we actually have air in the tires. Come on. Yep, here we go. Now I just have to get this down somehow. Wonder how heavy it is. Maybe we can use these little holders for something here. Well, it wasn't very elegant, but we got it down. Okay, so I finally have this entire puzzle unloaded. There is a lot of parts here. A lot of these things have already been cleaned up and fixed up and painted. Also, there's a lot of new replacement parts, like a completely new windshield assembly and other stuff. Oh yeah, and the seats, they have already been reupholstered, so they are actually looking very good and all fresh. I'm not going to completely uncover those, but they are looking good. So there's a lot of really good stuff here, but also a bunch of stuff that still needs some work. But I guess we can just talk a little bit about the recent history of this vehicle and why it's in such a state and all disassembled, and also why it's slowly turning red. So originally this vehicle belonged to the army branch of the Danish military, and it was a mechanics engineer type vehicle. But eventually this was auctioned off to the civilian market, and whoever owned this last eventually abandoned his entire property along with this on it. So this just sat out in some woods for many, many years. Now, eventually this was discovered by some authorities and they were able to get in contact with the owner, but he didn't want it back. So this was handed over to the guys over at the museum because they had already been looking for a Dodge Power Wagon with this box on it. But it was not this specific type of Dodge Power Wagon. So the thing is, that old Unimog 404 that we traded with them, that was originally meant to replace two separate vehicles, a fire truck and an ambulance. And both of those vehicles was this type of Dodge Power Wagon. Now that old airfield ambulance, that is the exact Power Wagon that they were looking for, but to everyone's knowledge, they just simply don't exist anymore. However, they were pretty much the same type of vehicle as the Dodge that I have right here, and they had the same type of box on the back. So they took on the project of bringing this up to shape and turn it into a replica of one of those old airfield ambulances. But as they told me in their own words, they just struggle a bit to really find the enthusiasm for this project. As they told me, it would only ever be a replica. It's just not the real thing. Unlike that Unimog that we traded with them, that is the original vehicle. So they were a lot more enthusiastic about that project, and also many of their other projects. So even though they've had this for a while, it was just not really getting anywhere. And eventually it was just sort of put aside all the time, and they worked on other stuff. So that's really why, even though they've already spent a lot of time, effort, and money on this project, they were willing to trade this for that old Unimog 404, even though it was not financially in their favor. I should just add that I have not asked for this. This was their own idea. But with all that out of the way, there is one crucial thing I'm going to have to know about this whole project before I know where this goes from here. And that is the engine. Does this even work? I've been told that this will fire up and run, but I have no idea if that's true. So let's just go ahead and give it a try now that we have it set up here in the chassis anyway. Oh yeah, and I don't think I've mentioned yet, but this is not the original engine for this vehicle. It's the exact same type, but this is a replacement because that original engine unfortunately had some of the spark plugs taken out for all of those years where it was sitting out in the woods. So that engine was all full of water and therefore completely locked up and trashed. But the guys have managed to find this replacement engine that has been taken out of a vehicle just like this one. So, first of all, will this even turn? I mean, it probably will. This has been stored inside, so it shouldn't be full of rust and all that. Oh yeah, I think we're in gear, aren't we? Yeah, but it's turning just fine. So the next thing I want to know here is, do we have any oil in this? Oh yeah, all right. Pretty dark, but that's good enough for now. All right, so I think step 2 is going to be to see if this starter actually works. Seems like a very simple unit. Looks like we just have to put positive directly in there. There's no relay or anything on the starter itself, so there's also no drive that it has to kick in. Well, there is, but it's probably just spring-loaded or something. So let's just try and hook some power to this and see if it'll turn. Actually, this is a military vehicle, so this might just be a 24 volt. Yes, it is. Okay, I gotta get another battery. Okay, so I got my ground right here on the starter itself, so that should be plenty good. Let's just try this, see what happens. Yes. Okay, so before we try and add some fuel to this, there is just one thing I've noticed, which is even though we are in neutral, just the friction alone is enough that this shaft out here is still spinning. So if it does actually start up, this little half shaft is going to be thrown around violently. So I'm just going to take that off. All right, so with that taken care of, before we go and put fuel to this, there is just the question of ignition. And that's where I get into some very unfamiliar territory because I have never seen this type of distributor unit here before. I think this is probably some kind of water-sealed system because this is a military vehicle. It does have those waterproof spark plugs and connectors, so that's probably why it has this unit down here as well. But the thing is, I don't know how this stuff is supposed to look, so I was kind of looking for an ignition coil, but I'm not sure there's supposed to be one. It might just be inside of this unit. So, you know what? Instead of trying to do a whole lot and messing around with this, let's just try it out, see what happens, and if we don't have spark, we can start digging into all of this. So I'm thinking I will just take this air cleaner off so we can get directly to that carburetor because this is probably some kind of oil bath air filter that's on here. Yep, that's exactly what it is. But we can actually get down to the carburetor and feed it with something, so that's pretty nice. You don't have to take it off. This looks like a throttle, yeah. And that is probably a choke. That's exactly what that is. All right, I'm just going to try with some starter fluid and spray it in here just to see if it even tries, because then we know we have ignition. So there is just one wire coming off this distributor ignition assembly down here, so I'm guessing that's the one that has to have a bit of positive on it to be able to generate a spark, but that's really just a guess. But it is sparking a bit when I attach it, so it is building a load on something, so I'm just going to go right ahead and try it. So, positive on that, a bit of fuel, and let's go. We got life. I was just about to give up. Let's just try that one more time, just to confirm. All right, I gotta do a little bit to this setup, but it's definitely sparking. It wants to go. And I guess we also just confirmed that we do have some oil pressure because they have cut an oil line right here. So this was just spewing oil down onto the axle and floor. I just went and put a bolt in it now, so we should be good. So I'm feeling pretty confident that this thing wants to run. So I'm gonna try and hook up a quick fuel line here, put it into a little small fuel can, and we're just gonna see if we can get this to run on its own power. Of course, I have no idea if that pump works, but it does have a little see-through filter housing up here, so I should be able to see if it's getting any fuel up near the carburetor. Okay, so let's see if we can get this running long enough to get some fuel up into that bowl. We are getting fuel up in there, so the pump works. Nice. Well, we did get fuel up in here, but unfortunately this bowl is leaking a little bit, so I don't really want this to pour fuel all over the exhaust manifold. I'm gonna take this off, see if it is just a leaking O-ring or something up in there. Otherwise, we'll just completely bypass this and just go directly to the carburetor. Oh yeah, this seal is hard as rock. Okay, no wonder that's leaking. All right, I think we're ready to try this for real, see if this can actually stay running. Now, if it does run, it's only going to be for a little bit because I don't have any cooling hooked up to this. And also, it's going to be pretty loud, so I'll probably need some hearing protection. The exhaust is just cut right here. All right, here we go. Let's try this out. Come on. That was just whatever fuel we had. Yes, that's really nice. It sounds great. Well, this thing warms up pretty quick. We got a little bit of a chimney going on in this water pipe here. But that was really nice. It was very cool to hear this thing running, and also just nice to have it confirmed that it does actually work. It's also really cool just how little it took to get this thing going. I mean, it's literally just one wire and some fuel and we're off. And really that is one of the things I think is really cool about this whole truck is just how simple this thing is. Like, you look at this and there is really nothing going on. Half the truck is missing, nothing is hooked up, the engine is not even bolted down, it's just sitting here, and yet this has everything that it needs to run and drive. All I really have to do is reconnect that little prop shaft I took off, and this whole thing could drive just like this. Not very well, of course, but it could. The whole thing is just really simple and robust. Another thing I think is really cool about these particular power wagons is that they have this closed cab. These are really the type of cabs you would normally see on the old civilian power wagons. Most of the military ones, they had that old school open cab, but I really like the look of these closed cabs. And these trucks were originally military trucks, so it's not civilian trucks converted. But speaking of the cab, I think we're just going to take this and put it back on the chassis where it belongs because, well, first of all, I can't have this sitting right here in front of the door, but also it's going to be much easier for me to store this vehicle if I keep all the parts together. So we're going to put all the big components back where they belong, or at least roughly, and then I'm going to take all these small loose components and we'll just put it in the box for now. Well, when the backhoe is on strike, someone else is going to have to do the heavy work. This is going to be a bit of a cold start. It's getting pretty chilly out here. Well, you don't have to watch me clean up the place, but here you go. Now you can at least get a slightly better idea of what this thing really looks like. Now, of course, I'm not going to be digging into this project right now. As you probably know, I have plenty of other stuff to do. We do still have to get the old McGears fixed up and done and get that thing ready to put in some work. And also, I really do need to get this old Unimog done and ready. I feel like I've been saying that a lot, but I really do need to get this thing wrapped up. But now that I know that the engine runs and this thing could become a fully functional vehicle, I have some time to think about what direction I'm going to take this project. Because the way I see it, there's really 3 ways we could go with this. Or, well, I suppose technically there's 4 ways, because one option would be to just sell it as is or even part it out. But other than that, the 3 ways that we could go that I see is A, going to be completely restoring this back to what it was. Bringing it back to that original Danish Army mechanics vehicle. Personally, I think that would be really cool, and as you might know by now, I really do respect the history and heritage of these kinds of vehicles. And also I know a lot of you watching along do appreciate when some of these vehicles are brought back like that. However, that project would be an enormous undertaking because there is still a lot to do on this truck. There is still a lot of rust in the cab. There is this whole box on the back that would have to be completely torn down to individual bits and have all the framing underneath completely rebuilt and put the whole thing back together. And honestly, just that box alone is probably going to be 60–70% of all the work of this vehicle. And on top of that, this vehicle is no longer original. Because they've already started that ambulance replica project, a lot of the original components of this truck are already long gone. And the other big challenge with that project would be that I didn't take this apart. I don't know exactly where every single thing is supposed to go. I could probably get pretty close with most of it, but if we're going completely original, we want everything to be just right. And I simply don't know what just right is on exactly this kind of truck. I mean, just imagine something as simple as the wiring harness, even though there's not a lot of it, I didn't take it out. I don't know exactly where it went. I don't know what paths it took along the vehicle. I don't know how it was tied up. I don't know what wires went together. Finding out all of these little details and getting information on that is going to be really time consuming and quite a big job. So if we do go the restoration path, this whole project is going to take a really long time, that's for sure. So, option 2 would be to finish what these guys have already started and turn this into a replica of one of those old Danish Air Force ambulances. I've been told that there was only ever 6 of those vehicles. But for what we know, all of them are long gone. But despite that, these guys have actually managed to source and collect a lot of those slightly unique components that were on those ambulances. So really, I should have everything here that is needed to complete that build. But of course, that means I am going to end up having to do a lot of the same restoration work, including this box back here. And not only would I have to completely refurbish the whole thing, it's also going to need a bunch of changes, especially on the inside, to turn it into an ambulance box. And finally, option F would be to hold back a little on the history stuff and instead have some fun with this truck. Because that old Unimog that I initially bought, I really didn't spend much money on that at all. And because that is what I traded for this, I have really not spent much money on this truck, which means that I could go ahead and take some liberties with it. Like, first off, I could just go ahead and completely get rid of that big old box on the back, and instead just make a simple bed, either an open or even a flat bed, and put on this thing. It's going to be so much easier to do and a lot less work, and also save me a ton of time. And also, I could start modifying little things about this vehicle to make it just more enjoyable to play around with. I mean, we could still keep the look, keep this whole army paint scheme and its old numbers and that stuff. That way we would still preserve some of that heritage, but also get a slightly better and more fun vehicle. I have been seeing a lot of pictures and videos of those old resto-modded Dodge Power Wagons, and honestly, I think those things are incredibly cool. Now, we don't have to go full resto mod, making this really fancy and stuff, but I think we could still bring this back just with a few changes that would save me a ton of work and a ton of money, and also make this a little bit more fun and enjoyable. But of course, all of this is just my current thoughts on this thing. And as mentioned, this project is not going anywhere for the next few days, so there's still some time to think about it. But despite that, I would of course really like to know what you guys think. What would you do if you had a truck like this? It's always fun to read, and you guys often give me some good ideas. So let me know down in the comments, where do you think this project should go from here? And with that, I think I've been talking more than enough. So thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.